Hello and welcome to this Excel beginner course. In this course, you learn exactly how formulas work so you can speed up your calculations and make them automatic. You also learn how to use formatting to create a nice and professional looking spreadsheet. Last but not least, you learn the heart of Excel, and that is, of course, functions. Functions are specific formulas that enables you to calculate something very specific like this. Let's dive in. First, a little bit of theory. So in Excel, we have columns and we have rows, and when they meet, we have a cell. And in those cells, there can be text, there can be numbers, and that's what we collectively call data. That's something you put into the spreadsheet. It can't really do anything specific, but it just holds information. You can also have formulas, obviously, in cells, and you can have absolutely nothing as well. A lot of people use Excel as a piece of paper, and they might as well just take a pen and start writing calculations and information on a piece of paper. And that's not really how you want to go about using Excel as efficiently as possible. So I'm going to show you how to go from using Excel as a piece of paper to store information to use it as a calculator and then use it as a spreadsheet. What is a formula exactly? A formula is everything that starts with an equal sign in a cell, and that's how you signify and tell Excel that now I'm going to write a formula, and that's going to be used to do something with the data instead of just storing data. So you can write 1 plus 1, that's a calculation, and that's a formula. You can also write 15 times 3, that would also be a calculation, that would also be a formula. In Excel and in math in general, we have these operators, and operators are what we put in between the formulas to actually tell Excel what we want to calculate. And you probably know these two signs here. We have the plus, and that is how you add something together, and then we have the minus or the dash on your keyboard that signifies that you are subtracting something. Also, we have this asterisk and we have the slash, and that's the operators for multiplication and division. This little symbol over here is used for exponentiation. Now, the order of operations are actually quite important, and they're used in Excel as they are used in math in general. So first you calculate the parentheses, or in any kind of calculation, what's in the parentheses is going to be calculated first. Then we have exponentiation and roots, then multiplication and division, then addition and subtraction. And I'm going to show you an example of how that can impact something you do here. So here we have an example of 10 plus 20 divided by 5. And following the order of operations, we're going to divide 20 by 5 first and then add that to the 10. So we have 20 divided by 5, and that's 4 plus 10, that equals 14. Now, if we change this up a little bit and add a parenthesis like this, then we have 10 plus 20 divided by 5 instead. So that's 10 plus 20, 30 divided by 5, and that gives 6. So as you can see, the order of operations is actually quite important. Now, let's try and look at that in Excel, because here we have this small little data set that is filled with sales orders from specific sales representatives over here, and we have some units and unit prices for each of the orders, and we are going to calculate the total price here. This is just storing information. Just like I said before, this is actually just a piece of paper. It's just a digital instead and inside a spreadsheet. But over here we want to use a formula to do a calculation, and let's just try and enter a formula. That's equal sign and 8 times 12.99. That's how you could calculate the total price over here. So if we just hit enter here, we have calculated this, and that means we have now used Excel as a calculator. This is something you could do on your phone or in a calculator anytime, and you probably already know how to do that. Instead, yeah, sure, we can do this for all the orders, but it's going to take a while, especially in a full data set with maybe thousands of rows. So instead, we're going to use references to actually make this pop and be quite automatic instead. And references are what actually makes calculations automatic in Excel. So here we have 8 times 12.99. That's the first order we tried to calculate with a formula. But instead, we're going to replace the actual numbers with references. And those are like placeholders. We can put something in instead. And that's actually references to cells. So we have E2 times F2. So the contents of E2 multiplied by the contents of F2. And the constants are actually 8 in E2 and 12.99 in F2. And that means that the calculation is actually the exact same as when I hard-coded the numbers into the formulas. But there's a lot of advantages to doing it like this instead. So when we do that in the spreadsheet, so we can just type the formula here and we can select with our cursor here, or we can just use the arrow keys to actually select the references to the cells. We're going to do E2 times F2. We could also instead just type it out. So equal E2 multiplication sign F2. We can also do it like this. So that's 3 ways to actually write references. Hit enter and then we have the total price. So the result is the same as we had before when we typed it in, and we actually typed 8 here and 12.99 here. But instead we are referencing it to the cells instead. And that has a lot of benefits throughout Excel. You're going to use references all the time. So one of the advantages of doing it like this is that you can actually update the numbers, and that will in turn automatically update the calculation. So if I write 10 units here, take a look at the total price, because that's going to change instead. If I write 20 here, it's going to change automatically. Let's go back to 8. I can change the price as well, and that's going to change the result. Now, if I did it with a calculator, or if I just typed it in like this, 8 times 12.99, then if I changed these numbers, that would not make any difference to the result. So that's a problem, and that's why you're going to use references instead. That's really important. Another big advantage is that you can copy this easily. You can't do that if you, like, if I typed 8 times 12.99, and if I wanted to do that automatically for all the other cells, then if I copy this, and you can do that by holding down the left mouse button while dragging this lower right corner of the cell, it would just write the same, and we don't want that, right? We want to do the actual calculation automatically. So if I instead write E3 here, I'm just going to do it in the cell below, but I might as well do it over here. If I just write it here, the formula with the references, then I could drag that down here and do all the calculations automatically, because Excel will automatically know that the references should change along the way. When I copy this down, the references follow along. That means that you see here there are references to these 2 cells, but when I try this here, you can see there are references to these cells, because the references change automatically to E5 and F5, and that's pretty cool, right? Now, there's actually more to references than this. And in this video, I'm going to show you something called absolute references, and I'm going to showcase a problem that arises by only using the references I showed you up until this point. Let's add a fee to the total price, and that fee, let's say it's $500, not percent like this. Let's make it $500. No, yeah, sure, $500. Okay, so we're gonna add $500 to all of the prices here, and we can do that several ways, but one of the ways to do that is to just add this cell right here. So a reference to the cell, that means, like, instead of writing plus 500, we can reference the cell, and that means if the fee changes to 800, we don't need to type it in all the way through. We can just write it here. Okay, so we want to copy that down to the other formulas, so we don't have to calculate and change all the formulas, but just do it automatically. So let's try and do that like this. But maybe you noticed that nothing really happened here. And that's because of the reference being relative. So let's check it out. So in this cell, we have the units times the unit price plus the fee of 500. And that's good. That's what we want, right? But if we go down to this cell right here, we can see that the units times the unit price, that's cool, plus a reference to cell I3. but I3 does not hold the fee. I2 does, not I3. So because we have used these relative references, the references move along with the formula, and that causes a problem right here. So we need to lock this reference so it always stays on this cell right here. We do that by turning it to something called an absolute reference. So just place your marker somewhere inside the reference and hit the F4 key on your keyboard. And if you're on a Mac, it's Command T. And if you're on a Windows laptop, it's you probably need to hold down the FN key before you type F4. So if you hit Enter now and copy this down like this, you will see that the numbers change, and you will also see that obviously this is the correct reference, but also this is the correct reference as well, because it stays up here with the actual fee in I2. So you learned about formulas and references to speed up your calculations. Now, I'm going to teach you how to use formatting to make your spreadsheet look professional. Here is the spreadsheet from last time. And here we have the spreadsheet after we're done with some basic formatting tricks. Now, is that going to change your life forever? No, it is not. But it is going to set you ahead of 90% of Excel users. Pretty cool for just something that takes a few minutes to learn. I think that's good enough. All right, so let's just dive in and see how it's actually done. So formatting is all about making things as accessible for everyone to look at, so it's easy to understand. So you're trying to control where everyone's looking and make it easier on their eyes to look at the numbers and stuff. So first, we're going to change these numbers so they have a 1000 separator. Now you can actually add that up here on the Home tab like this. But that also adds the decimal points. You can remove them just by clicking here. That's pretty cool, pretty easy. But it actually leaves a space behind the number, after the number, and I don't really like that. So instead, I'm doing it another way. So I'm just gonna undo the actions here like this, and then I'm gonna hit the shortcut Control 1. Now you can also access this Format Cells box by right-clicking and click on Format Cells, and there you have it. So Format Cells, on the first tab here, go to the number category and just to choose that one, the number format. Click on Use 1000 Separator and make 0 decimal places. Change that to 0 and click OK. Now, this is actually the same, but we don't have this stupid little space behind the after the number, and I prefer it this way. Now, that's just a small thing, but it actually makes the numbers easier to understand, and it's a nice little detail. Now, let's move on to bigger things. Let's add a title. So right-click on the row number 1 here and insert a column. Now, we are going to merge and center this to make it into one big cell, and then we'll add the title, and that's going to be sales data from the what was it, a Los Angeles store. Let's just say this is from the LA store. And now what we want to do is to separate the titles and the headers up here from the data and the formulas down here. We usually do that with some colors. So let's just pick a color. I recommend that you don't use these standard colors, because the goal here is to make it easier on the eyes. But these colors, they don't really make it easy on the eyes. It actually makes it more difficult to look at the numbers and data. So instead, pick these other theme colors and use some nuance and shade of a color you like. I typically like to use this blue right here. So I'm just gonna click that. Now, so far so good. We're not quite there yet, but this is a nice start. So again, select all the cells and click here to bold the text. That also helps to separate the headers and the titles from the data and the formulas. And additionally, we're going to add a border around this. So there are a few ways to do that. You can click this little button here to add different types of borders to the data. But actually, a nice trick is that you can click here, or you can right click and go to format cells again, and then you can go to the border tab, and from there you can actually draw the border in this little preview box. You can select the border you want to use, and you can click where it should go over here. This takes a little time getting used to, so just play around with it. And that's actually the best way to learn this. Now let's just draw up here. You can use these presets to draw let's make a thick border on the outline and then a thinner border on the inside like this, and hit OK. And there we have it, a nice border around the headers over here. Cool. Let's make this a title a little bit bigger like this. And there we have it. That's actually the format, the format that we were after. This is actually setting you apart from most Excel users, and when your boss looks at this, they'll see someone who looks like an Excel expert and not a total noob. All right, so this little trick that I was about to show you, so let me just I'm gonna delete this one here actually, and then I'm gonna remove the formatting from this data set up here. So clear formats. Now this trick is 2 or 3 or 4 clicks or something like that, and then the whole data set is formatted automatically. And that is actually to format as a table. And here it's just here from the home tab, click it and format as a table, and then just select the color you want. Sometimes when you hover your mouse over this, it'll actually show a preview, and sometimes it doesn't. I prefer the medium ones. Let's just use this one here. And you gotta check that your table has headers if it actually has headers up here, which it probably does. So click OK, and now you have a nicely formatted spreadsheet. And actually this data set has these banded rows. That actually means that every other row has a different color. You can more easily see what the numbers, in this case, what numbers are belonging to what orders here. So that's actually quite nice as well. That's another way to format a data set, and that's just done in a few clicks. Now, this also comes with a lot of other stuff because it's a table, and that's a whole other thing. But you need to know both ways because you will need both at some point in your career. Probably mostly the simple formatting tricks that makes up this. Those you should be using all the time whenever you have a spreadsheet, because it'll make everything much easier to look at, and it will help your colleagues understand what's going on in your spreadsheet as well. You just learned to make your spreadsheet look a lot better than before with a few formatting tricks. Now, it might not be a work of art yet, it doesn't have to be, but it's definitely way more professionally looking. Now, I teach you all about simple functions in Excel, and this is really where it all starts. So what is a function really? Now, first of all, a function is not the same as a formula, although those words are typically used to explain the same thing. Now, a formula is whatever starts with an equal sign in Excel, and that can contain a function, but it is not a function on its own. So a formula for adding numbers together could look like this: A1, A plus A2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But a function inside a formula that does the same could look like this. Now notice the range here, and a range is simply a bunch of cells grouped together so they're adjacent to each other. Now this is an easier way of going about adding these cells together, and you can't do that with a formula on its own. Now a function has a syntax, and that's the structure of the function. Now most of them are pretty easy. So an equal sign, that's not a part of the syntax, that's just to get it started with a formula, and then a function name, an open parenthesis, an argument, and a close parenthesis. Now, this is called the syntax. The name, the parenthesis, and the stuff that goes into the actual function, and that's the argument. Now, an argument can be a cell and it can be a range, which is just another word for a group of adjacent cells. It could also be true or false, or 1 or 0, or text, or something else. But typically it's a cell or a range, at least here with the simple beginner functions. Now, let's start with the sum function, the most popular and used function in the world, in Excel at least. So let's write the syntax for the sum function. So the argument of the sum function is typically a range of cells. So we have an equal sign, the word sum, which is the function name, and then an open parenthesis and a range. And that range could be G3 through G20, and that's the actual range we're going to sum up in a bit. Now just a closed parenthesis, and that's it. Now, it's very important to note that you could not just write this in a cell and then that would sum up the range G3 through G20. It would not do it because that's a formula. You need a function, so that would not work. So to sum up some cells, and let's just sum up all the total prices over here, write equal and the function name, which is sum, open parenthesis, and then select all the cells you want to sum up, G3 through G20, close parenthesis, and hit enter. Now that's a little more than 31,000. That's the sum. That was pretty easy, wasn't it? Now let's do that one more time. Sum G3 through G20. You can also write it. You don't have to select it. Hit enter. That's it. Now, let's look at something really interesting, because all simple functions work the same. So equal sum G3 through G20. That contains the argument, which is just a range. So the range of the cells we want to sum up. Now, instead of writing sum here, we can just write something else. We can write count, and that would actually count the number of cells in that range. Now, we don't have to write count. We can instead write average, and that would calculate the average of the values in that range instead. That's all because the syntax is simply function name and an argument. And that argument in this case is just a range. Let's try it out. Let's count these cells, right? Count, open parenthesis, select the cells, close parenthesis. That's it. There are 18 cells with numbers here. Let's calculate the average. Write average. You don't actually have to write it with capital letters. You can also just write average. Like this, open parenthesis, select the cells, close parenthesis, hit enter. That's the average. Let's find the minimum value of these cells. So that's just min, open parenthesis, and select the cells, close parenthesis, hit enter. Let's find the largest number in those cells, max, open parenthesis, and select the numbers. I think you get it now, close parenthesis, and hit OK, enter, hit enter, not OK. And that's actually it. That's how you find all these key numbers for this data set in just a few seconds by using functions. And all simple functions work this way, or at least most simple functions work this way. So that's why you can calculate all these specific numbers very easily with functions. In less than 30 minutes, you learned how far you can actually get with just a few simple formulas, some formatting, and some functions. But this was just a taste test of what you can actually do with Excel. Thanks for watching.